States. Give it up to my friend, the man, Andrew Yang. Good morning, New Hampshire, and Happy New Year! Yeah! It's 2020!
Yes!
It's a new decade, it's a new era, it's a new morning. So I saw this on the schedule and I thought, wow, these people must not have partied that hard last night. I had a great night last night. We just reported we raised over $1 million just yesterday alone.
Yes!
$4 million over the last week. I can't break the news because we promised it to some national publication, but we grew more than 50% from Q3 to Q4.
Yeah!
And we raised $10 million in Q3, so it's a lot of growth in the Yang campaign. And the reason is because we're addressing the real problems that got Donald Trump elected in 2016. How many of you know I went to high school here in New Hampshire? And most people don't seem to know that, which is cool, because a lot of people are what I call Yang curious here today. I went to Phillips Exeter Academy and graduated in 1992. And after Exeter, I went to college in Rhode Island at Brown, became a lawyer in New York City, and spent 5 whole months as an unhappy lawyer. I'm sorry if that sounds familiar to someone in this room. And after that, I left to start a business. How many of you have started a business or organization or club or mailing list? So if you have your hand up, you know 2 things. Number 1, it's much harder than anyone ever lets on, right? And number 2, when someone asks you how it's going, what do you say? It's going great. My business too went great until it failed. My parents told people I was still a lawyer because it was a much easier story. But I've been bitten by the bug. I worked at another company and another, and I became the CEO of an education company that grew to become #1 in the United States, and was bought by a bigger company in 2009. How many of you were here in New Hampshire 10 years ago, in 2009? Now, how was the financial crisis in this part of the state? This is probably better insulated than other parts of New Hampshire, but she gave me the double thumbs down. Yesterday, in Derry, I asked a similar question, and this 14-year-old boy raised his hand and he raised his hand and said, it was a really tough time. And I looked at him and I joked, I said, how the heck would you remember? You must have been 4 at the time. And he said, well, my parents had to sell my house, so I remember. And I was like, oh yeah, you would remember that. The financial crisis was a disaster for so many communities around the country, and I thought I had some insight as to why it had happened. So many of the smart wannabe whiz kids I'd gone to Exeter and Brown and Columbia with had gone straight to Wall Street to create the mortgage-backed securities and the derivatives and the exotic financial instruments that had crashed the economy. So I thought, that's a train wreck. What do we want our people to do if it's not head to Wall Street and dream up things that are going to end up becoming weapons of mass financial destruction? And I had so much of my career shaped by entrepreneurship that I thought we needed more entrepreneurs to create jobs and businesses in places like Detroit, Cleveland, Birmingham, New Orleans, and cities around the country. So this, in full credit to my wife, because this is where I went from being a fairly normal guy to something less normal. I quit my job to start a nonprofit. How many of you work in nonprofits? How many of you volunteered for a nonprofit? You should really just raise your hand and pretend on that one. There we go. So I quit my job to start a nonprofit. I donated some seed money to start it, and I started calling rich friends with this question: do you love America? And the smart among them said, what does it mean if I say yes? And I said, at least $10,000. And then 12 people said, I love America for $10,000. It's like, I thought you did. So their money plus my money, we started with about $250,000. And I grew and grew to the millions. We helped create thousands of jobs in 15 cities around the country. I was honored by the Obama administration multiple times as an ambassador of entrepreneurship. So I got to bring my wife to meet the president. My in-laws were very excited about me that week. And they're like, oh, she did all right. Well, unfortunately, My 7 years running Venture for America, traveling the country, gave me this unease where I felt like the work I was doing was pouring water into a bathtub that had a giant hole ripped in the bottom, that things were getting worse, not better. How many of you grew up in the Midwest? Let's try that. South? West Coast? Many of you are probably like me, upstate New York, mid-Atlantic. Or let's say New England, that's gonna be most of you. Yeah. I had never seen Missouri, Ohio, Michigan, Alabama, Louisiana until those 7 years. And I was blown away by the gulf between regions, where if you fly between Michigan and Manhattan, or St. Louis and San Francisco, you feel like you're crossing dimensions and decades and ways of life and not just a few time zones. But I was still stunned when Donald Trump became our president in 2016. How did you all react that night? Confusion,
Shock.
sobbing.
Fear.
Fear. It was a giant red flag to me. I said, this is not business as usual. Tens of millions of our fellow Americans decided that taking a bet on the narcissist reality TV star was the right way to go. And even if you reacted with fear or tears, we all have family members and friends and neighbors who celebrated his victory. I'm a numbers guy, and I try to find an explanation in the numbers. If you were to turn on cable news networks, why would you think that Donald Trump's our president today?
Russian assistance.
Russia, Facebook, Hillary Clinton, FBI,
Fox News.
emails, media, racism perhaps. But as a numbers guy, I wanted to find an explanation that I could hang my hat on, and I found it. The reason why Donald Trump won in 2016, in my view, is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs over the last number of years. And where were those jobs? Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Iowa, all of the swing states that Donald Trump needed to win. And if you doubt this explanation, there's a straight line up between the adoption of industrial automation in a voting area and the movement towards Trump in that area. It happened here in New Hampshire, but it happened earlier in the northern part of the state. You all lost more than 12,000 manufacturing jobs over a period of years. I have been to those towns, and those towns have never recovered. After the plant closed, the shopping centers closed, people left, the schools shrank, and that town now is monitoring how quickly their people are leaving more than any signs of growth. That same pattern played out in communities in Michigan, Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Missouri, and that's what got Donald Trump into the Oval Office. Unfortunately, what we did to the manufacturing jobs is now migrating to retail jobs, call center jobs, fast food jobs, and eventually truck driving jobs. How many of you have noticed stores closing around where you live here in New Hampshire? And why are those stores closing?
Amazon.
One word answer, Amazon. Amazon soaking up $20 billion in value every single year, closing 30% of our stores and malls. Most common job in your state, retail clerk. Average retail clerk's a 39-year-old woman making between $9 and $10 an hour. When her store closes, what is her next opportunity? How much did Amazon pay in federal taxes last year?
Zero.
Zero, that is your math, New Hampshire. 20 billion out, 30% of the stores closed, you get zero back. When you call the customer service line of a big company and you get the software, the bot, you do the same thing I do, which is you pound 000, say human, human, human to get someone on the line. Right? Raise your hand if that's what you do. Oh yeah, we all do that. That software is miserable. But in 2 or 3 short years, the software is going to sound like this. Hey Andrew, how's it going? What can I do for you? It'll be fast, seamless, a little bit seductive. What will that mean for the 2.5 million Americans who work in call centers right now making $14 an hour? How many of you have seen a self-serve kiosk in a fast food restaurant like McDonald's? They say every location in the United States will have self-serve kiosks by next year.
Wow.
And now they're looking at the back of the house with robot burger flippers and fry cookers and the rest of it. And the rubber will really hit the road when robot trucks hit our highways in earnest. How many of you know a truck driver here in the state? There are 3.5 million truck drivers in our country, and we now have trucks that even 2 weeks ago can cross the country without any human intervention. We just had a butter truck that transported 20 tons of butter from California to Pennsylvania. Why butter? I have no idea. But you can Google robot butter truck. And it thought of just like, it'd be a fun thing to transport butter. So, my friends in California, and I'm friends with some of the technologists who are working on this stuff, they tell me they're 98% of the way to self-driving trucks. And the reason why they are confident they can get the last 2% is because the cost savings around self-driving trucks are estimated to be $168 billion a year. So think about how much money that gives you to try and solve for that last 2%. If you're an investor and someone comes to you and says, hey, I can help solve this problem, I just need $500 million to hire some of the best engineers in the country to work on it, then you're like, here you go, because you see the biggest pot of gold in American business lying in front of you. So these are the changes that helped get Donald Trump into the Oval Office. We're in the third inning of the greatest economic and technological transformation in the history of our country, what experts are calling the fourth industrial revolution. When is the last time you heard a politician say fourth industrial revolution?
Just now.
Just now, New Hampshire. And I'm barely a politician. So these were the facts and figures that I unpacked in 2017. Donald Trump wins. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be Mr. Job Creation. Trump's in the Oval Office. We're going through this incredible set of changes. So I went to our leaders in Washington, D.C., and I asked them, what are we going to do to help our people manage this time, this transition? Immigrants are being scapegoated for problems immigrants have next to nothing to do with. So how are we going to solve the real problems? And what do you think the folks in D.C. said to me when I asked, what are we going to do to help our people?
Don't talk about it.
Run for president.
They definitely did not say that. The three big responses I got were, number one, Andrew, we cannot talk about that. Number two, we should study that further. And number three, we must educate and retrain all Americans for the jobs of the future. And I said, that sounds really great. But I took a look at the studies. Do you all want to guess how effective the government-funded retraining programs were for the manufacturing workers who lost their jobs in the Midwest?
No.
I'm anchoring you very low because it is low. 0 to 15%. They're a total dud. The reality is, of those manufacturing workers, half of them left the workforce and never worked again. And of that group, half filed for disability. We then saw surges in suicides and drug overdoses in those communities to the point where now America's life expectancy has declined for 3 years in a row, in large part because drug overdoses and suicides have now overtaken vehicle deaths as cause of death in the United States. You know the last time America's life expectancy declined 3 years in a row, as it has for the last 3 years?
Spanish flu.
The Spanish flu of 1918, a global pandemic that killed millions. You have to go back that far. It is highly unusual for life expectancy to decline ever in a developed country. Ordinarily, we get richer, stronger, healthier. But in the United States of America, we've gone down and then down and then down again. And when I said retraining is not working to the folks in D.C., one of them actually said, well, I guess we'll get better at it. The truth is this, that the folks in D.C. will succeed whether or not we succeed or fail. And one person in D.C. said something that brought me here to you all today, this fine New Year's Day morning, January 1, 2020. He said, Andrew, you're in the wrong town. No one here is going to do anything about this. Because fundamentally, this is a town of followers, not leaders. And the only way we would do anything about it is if you were to create a wave in other parts of the country and bring that wave crashing down on our heads. And I said, challenge accepted. I'll be back in 2 years. Because that was 2 years ago in New Hampshire, and here we are.
Yeah!
So now, January 1st, 2020, I stand before you. I'm fifth in the polls to be the Democratic nominee. We raised $10 million last quarter in increments of only $30 each, so my fans are almost as cheap as Bernie's. But all of this money we've generated, it's 100% grassroots, people-powered, no corporate PAC money. This is the campaign to rewrite the rules to work for us, to work for our families. Now, you're here today, And we're in New Hampshire, and it's like my favorite place to campaign, because this is the only place where democracy is still working the way it was originally intended. Now, you're a bit spoiled by it, but I did the math. Do you know how many Californians each of you is worth? 1,000 Californians each. So how many people are in this room right now? What's the fire code in this room? And this is a pretty packed room, so I'm going to say maybe 160? That's about right. That's 4 football stadiums worth of Californians. That's the power in this room. That's why I love campaigning here, because you literally have the ability to change the course of history. You're some of the most powerful people in our society today. I know it doesn't feel like it. You're just like living your life. You're seeing a presidential candidate and you're kind of used to it. But you have almost unparalleled power to change where we head as a country. And the question is, how are we going to use that power? What sort of vision are you going to take to the rest of the country? Now, I know at some point in the last number of weeks, you heard this. There's a guy running for president who wants to give everyone $1,000 a month. Now, some of you are clapping, but many of you thought, that's a gimmick, that's too good to be true, that will never happen. I understand. This is not my idea, and it's not a new idea. Thomas Paine was for it at the founding of our country, called it the Citizens Dividend. Martin Luther King, whose son I had the privilege of meeting with in Atlanta, said that this is where we needed to go as a country to have a guaranteed minimum income for all Americans. It is what Martin Luther King was fighting for when he was assassinated in 1968. 1,000 economists endorsed this plan in the 60s. It was so mainstream it passed the U.S. House of Representatives twice under Richard Nixon in 1971. The Family Assistance Plan would have guaranteed an income floor for all Americans. And then 11 years later, one state passed a dividend where now everyone in that state gets between $1,000 and $2,000 a year, no questions asked. And what state is that?
Alaska.
And how does Alaska pay for it?
Oil.
And what is the oil of the 21st century?
Technology. Data.
Data, technology, AI, software, self-driving cars and trucks. A study just came out that said that our data is now worth more than oil. How many of you saw that study? How many of you got your data check in the mail last month? We joke, but if our data is now worth tens of billions of dollars a year, who's getting the checks? Facebook, Amazon, Google, and the mega tech companies that are paying zero or near zero in taxes. This is the reality of the 21st century. I believe that our data should still be ours, even if we lend it to the tech companies. What do you think?
Yes.
So in this context, when all of this value is getting extracted from our communities, this dividend begins to make more and more sense, particularly in the face of unprecedented changes in our workforce. And if you have this dividend of $1,000 a month in our hands, in our community's hands, where would the money go in real life?
Student loans.
Small coffee shops, I like that. Student loans, car repairs, savings. How much of it would stay right here in New Hampshire? Most of it, not all of it. You get your own Netflix password. Some of it would float up. But most of it would go right here to your local economy, to car repairs you've been putting off, to daycare expenses, to Little League signups, to local nonprofits, to religious organizations. This is the trickle-up economy, New Hampshire, from our people, our families, and our communities up. This would make our people stronger, healthier, mentally healthier, give our kids a better chance to learn. Right now, we are being told that things are going great when many of us are not sure they actually are great in our communities. Right now, corporate profits, record highs, GDP, record highs. Also at record highs, stress, anxiety, depression, financial insecurity, student loan debt, suicides, drug overdoses. I'm going to ask you a fundamental question. If your GDP is going up and your life expectancy is going down, which do you listen to? Even the inventor of GDP said 100 years ago, this is a terrible measurement for national well-being and we should never use it as that. And here we are riding it off a cliff 100 years later saying GDP, GDP. Robot trucks will be great for GDP, but they're going to be very bad for many American communities. So what we have to do is we have to line up how we're measuring our economic progress. And the example that's closest to home for me is that my wife Evelyn is at home with our 2 boys, one of whom is autistic. What does her work get valued at in our economic measurements every day? Zero. And it's not just her, it's caregivers around the country, volunteers, coaches, mentors, many artists, many journalists. A lot of the things that we value most are getting zeroed out by the market more and more. And this applies most to women and underrepresented minorities because we all know that women do much more of the unrecognized and uncompensated work in our society. We're trying to say to our corporate environments, treat women better, when the corporations themselves operate in this fundamentally anti-woman marketplace. And then the argument you're making for elevating women is that you'll make more money if you elevate women. And to me, that misses the point. The point is that we need to rewrite the rules so that everyone is valued, regardless of whether they're making the business more money or not.
Yes.
On an epic, catastrophic scale. That's how you wind up having otherwise reasonable people say we should turn coal miners into coders. Because you say, wait, if you don't have any value in the marketplace, we're going to somehow figure out a way for you to have some new value, even if it does not make any sense on the face of it. That is the race we cannot win. I'm friends with some of the leading technologists in the country. They say, I've seen what's in the lab in artificial intelligence, and it's going to be much more disruptive than people know. You know how that conversation never goes? I have seen what's coming out of the lab, and everything will be fine. The more someone knows, the more concerned they are. I spoke to a group of 70 CEOs in New York City, and I asked them, how many of you are looking at replacing your back office clerical workers with AI and software in the coming years? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. The fact is you could fire any CEO who didn't have his hand up, because we have a system that's designed around maximizing the bottom line, and unfortunately the bottom line and our well-being have diverged. In New Hampshire, it is up to you to line them up. You're the only people in the country who can do it. It's up to you to see to it that Amazon pays its fair share in taxes. And that if we can get our tiny slice of every Amazon sale, every Google search, every Facebook ad, eventually every robot truck mile, we can actually include ourselves in all of the gains of this economy, rather than more and more of us feeling like they're being left behind. And that goes much more for rural areas that are getting depleted successively. It's one reason why we have this urban-rural divide and so many people are turning towards Donald Trump, because the Democratic Party is not addressing what's happening in many of our communities. Donald Trump's our president today because he had a very, very simple story. He said he was going to make America great again. What did Hillary Clinton say in response? Sorry. America's already great. Remember that, New Hampshire? I know it's been a long 3 years, but it's about to end. Oh my gosh, it's been 4 years? It's been 4 years as of today. When she said America's already great, that response did not quite work. We have to acknowledge the depth and severity and reality of the problems on the ground, because they are real, but then we need real solutions. What were Donald Trump's solutions? Now build a wall, turn the clock backwards, I'm going to bring the old jobs back. New Hampshire, you know we have to do the opposite of these things. We have to turn the clock forward. We have to accelerate our economy and society to rise to the challenges of the 21st century. And we need to evolve in the way we think about ourselves and our work and our value. I am the ideal candidate for that job because the opposite of Donald Trump is an Asian man who likes math. Yeah. Thank you very much, New Hampshire. Thank you. You may not know this, but math is an acronym. And what does it stand for?
Make America think harder.
Make America think harder. That's right. That is your job, New Hampshire. It is your job to move this country, not left, not right, but forward. And that is where you are going to take us in 2020. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Happy New Year!
Yeah!
2020 is over. This one's just beginning. And I know just the way we're going to start this take-eight off by taking a question or two or three. And this gentleman managed to sit in the front row right next to the mic, not a plant. I have no idea what he's about to say. Here we go.
Good afternoon. The Constitution gives the central government the power to fix the standard of weights and measures, and the law they passed in 1866, making the metric system legal, still lets the states impose speed limits in miles and force grocers to post unit prices per pound. And when my wife filed for citizenship, it says, write your height in feet and inches. Do not use metric units, because so many bureaucrats and politicians are on the side of the dummies who don't know the metric system and are proud of it. So, Mr. Make Americans Think Harder, can we, the people of the United States, count on President Yang to secure the blessings of the metric system?
I love this question so much. I'm a fan of the metric system. And you're not going to believe, well, you will. You will definitely believe this. But the metric system is actually safer. Because when you're dealing with microdoses of medication for infants, measuring it in milliliters is much, much safer than measuring something in like teaspoons or tablespoons. And you actually can confuse teaspoons and tablespoons and end up giving people the wrong dosage. So the metric system would literally save lives every year. So to the extent that we can migrate towards the metric system, I would love to make it happen. I will say that I think many Americans would highly resist giving their height in centimeters or meters, because I have no idea what my height is in the metric system. Like if someone gives me their height in feet and inches, I know what they're talking about. That said, the metric system is the world standard. There are actually difficulties that arise from us being on a different standard, and it would be safer. So thank you, sir. Very wise. I like to go man, woman. So we need an awesome question from... Oh, here we go. Yet another non-plant.
Oh, no, I don't need to. Okay.
Oh, it's not long enough. You have to go.
There's a lot of talk in the media about how great the economy is going right now, and it's a big reason why there's concern that Trump will be reelected.
Yep.
And I would like your take on the facts and figures that they use to justify how great the economy is.
I would love to.
Tell us who you are, please.
My name is Sarah. I'm from Connecticut.
Oh, yes, Sarah.
So Sarah's question is, hey, there are all of these headlines about how great the economy is, and that favors Donald Trump, and how would I respond to that? So I mentioned a little bit how GDP's up, and corporate profits are up, but many people don't feel like they're included in this. The three big measurements that we use to measure our economic progress are GDP, stock market prices, and what's the third? Headline unemployment, right? Now, if you look back to when Donald Trump was running for president, he said that the unemployment rate was fake news. Remember that? He said, it doesn't measure the fact that millions have dropped out of the workforce. And then he became president. All of a sudden, it became real news. The headline unemployment rate is dramatically misleading for a number of reasons. Number one, if you drop out of the workforce, you no longer count. Right now, our labor force participation rate in the United States is 63%, the same levels as El Salvador and Costa Rica, and close to a multi-decade low. Millions of Americans have left the workforce, particularly unskilled men, and that does not count in the unemployment rate. Number two, the unemployment rate doesn't include whether you're underemployed, which unfortunately applies to 40 to 44% of recent college graduates who are doing a job that does not require a degree. So if you're a young person and that's the situation you're in, you should know that's very normal. And if you're the parent of a young person who's in that situation, you should know it's not their fault. It's about half of recent college graduates. But the headline unemployment rate obscures that. It also obscures people who are in temp gig or contract jobs that don't have benefits or working multiple jobs to make ends meet. All of that just gets checked off as employed. If you look at the more relevant statistics, which are income and affordability, then things are very, very dark because people's compensation has been essentially flat while our housing prices have crept up, our education and daycare expenses have shot up, and our healthcare expenses only go in one direction, that's up. Does anyone ever remember getting a notice from their health insurance company being like, great news, your rates went down? No one in American history has gotten that letter. Because their business model is literally, it's like, oh, another year, time to ratchet the prices up. Unfortunately, colleges operate the same way. It's like, oh, another year, prices go up. So what's happened is that affordability has become an increasing problem for many, many Americans, and it's what's driving us to all of this stress. Why the heck is college 2.5 times more expensive than it was when I went to school? Did it get 2.5 times better? No, it just got 2.5 times more expensive. And if you're a family, you're like, well, I have no choice but to pay. And then the government's like, don't worry, we'll give you loans. And so we're up to $1.6 trillion in student loan debt. The average graduate's now graduating with tens of thousands of dollars in debt and a job market that's 40 to 44% likely not to have a job for them that actually required the degree. So this is the ugliness that the three big stats ignores. Stock market prices correspond to essentially the top 10 to 20% of the population, which may be some people in this room totally cool, but the bottom 50% of Americans own essentially zero in stock. So if you say, hey, stock market price is up, then half Americans are like, what's that to me? So we do have, in some ways, a growing economy that's been juiced by the $1.5 trillion tax cut that Trump passed, the majority of which went to shareholders. So if you were a shareholder and you saw your 401k go up, yeah, that's normal. But that's not the majority of Americans who do not feel included in this boom. And in my opinion, if you have a predictable sugar rush of a boom fueled by $1.5 trillion tax cut that went to the big corporations just added to the public debt, that's not a cause for celebration. That's like, hey, guess what? I just took money from our kids, gave it to the corporations, yay me. I mean, like that's not good public policy at all. So we're not all of us, but we've been through boom and bust cycles before. And anyone who thinks that this economy is just going to keep on rising to the moon forever, like, isn't seeing some of the signs. Because you look at some of the overhyped companies that are now crashing in value, that is the early sign of a downturn, what's to come. Like, how many of you saw the headlines about like WeWork, the like utter fiasco that is WeWork? When a WeWork happens, it is not alone. Like, you go through dozens of other companies, you'll find the same nonsense, honestly. Where you look up and say, how the heck did you value this company at billions of dollars when it's literally just burning cash, hand over fist? And that's like a canary in a coal mine. So that's my long-winded response to the reason why no one should be that excited about the headline economic numbers because they don't reflect what a lot of Americans are actually experiencing.
I think we have time for one more question before we.
Sorry, I must be because I'm long-winded in the answer. Sorry about that. Sir.
My name is Faris. I'm from Syria. Ever met anyone from Syria?
I believe I have.
Good. So I like you. I follow you. I open your website on a daily basis. My question for you is, first, I think that, in my opinion, your weak point is that you don't have experience. You might not have the good reaction to an international incident, for example. So let's say that you're president and you heard that there's a chemical attack in Syria that killed 100,000 people, 50% of them are children. What is your reaction?
Well, first, thank you for the support, and I'd like to take this opportunity to outline my foreign policy perspective more generally. I think President Trump has done us a lot of harm by being so erratic and unreliable, particularly with our long-standing partners and allies. We need to renew our investment in the State Department and diplomacy. James Mattis, the former Secretary of Defense, said, the more we spend on our diplomats, the less we have to spend on ammunition. And that is the right way to go. We're spending $700 billion a year or so on the military-industrial complex that may not actually be making us safer. So to me, we have to get smarter about trying to address what the real threats to our security are, and then invest in rebuilding partnerships and alliances around the world, and let our historical friends know that America is open for business. In terms of a specific incident like the one you described, I would sit with my advisors and say, how can we make sure that this is appropriately addressed and never happens again? The ideal would be to prevent it from happening, but of course we're not in position to be able to do that right now. So I have a 3-part test for military intervention in a foreign theater. Number 1, there has to be a vital national interest of ours at stake, or the ability to avert a humanitarian crisis, which this would clearly be. Number 2, we have to have a clearly defined time frame where we can look our troops in the eyes and say, you will be here for this long, and then we will be able to have you come home. And not one of these imaginary timelines where like, yeah, you think you can get it done in this time frame, but actually be able to look people in the eyes and say, this is when you will be back. And number 3, you have to have partners and allies that are willing to join you in the mission, which in this case, I'm sure we would. So if these 3 conditions are met, then I would consider intervening militarily. And the scenario that you just described sounds like it would be very likely to satisfy those conditions. Thank you so much, New Hampshire. Oh, I love this state. I hope that you are excited to help send this message to the rest of the country that this is still ours, that we can make this place work for us again. Right now, Washington, D.C. is the richest city in our country. What do they produce? I'm going to leave that to your imagination. But it's up to you to retake our government from the corporate interests that have overrun it and send a very clear message to the rest of the country that instead of us being subject to the machines have to work for us. Thank you all so much.
Let's give it up again, Andrew Yang. All right, yeah, you can stand up. You can rise up for Andrew Yang.
Early today for that.
Oh my gosh. Look at this room. It's incredible.
Who here would like a selfie with the next president?
Please.
I kind of thought. Here's how we're going to do it.